Here I've got a Retina IIIC, big C. This one's come to me for servicing, and I'm told that everything works, but it really needs to be serviced to get it into good, best working order. So I'm going to check it over and see what I notice. Let's have a look at this camera. Just checking the meter. And the meter scale is a little bit round from where I would expect to see it. That may not be a major issue. It may work fine. Right, opening and closing the front of the camera. That seems to work smoothly enough. The focus. The focus feels quite stiff. It's smooth enough, but it's quite stiff. Cocking the shutter. That moved smoothly enough. I noticed that the frame counter, the numbers aren't quite centered there. The shutter, that was set on a low speed, that was on one second. It sounds possibly a little slow, certainly nothing particularly noticeable there. Set it to an 8. Oh, that's definitely slow. The film counter is quite sticky. I noticed that. I went to move the dial, advance it from the number 1 position. That was very slow to come back, so it's a bit gummy. The rangefinder, how's that? I'll just have a quick look. Well, the viewfinder is quite cloudy. The rangefinder is not bad actually. The alignment appears to be quite good, but it is quite cloudy. Film advance moves smoothly enough. On the base of the camera, well, first thing I notice is the leatherette is lifting. It's loose around the edges, and here it's torn. Now that there is where the screw for the hinge screw for the front door comes through. Now if that screw backs out, that's not an uncommon thing to find that the leatherette's damaged there. The leatherette, you can possibly see, is loose here. It's raised and loose on the body at that point. It's not stuck back flat. The tripod socket. Well, the back catch release cover seems to work okay. The tripod socket is very brassy on the inside. I don't know whether you'll be able to see that. It's quite brassy in here. Now often that's a sign that an unsuitable tripod screw has been forced in there, and what tends to happen when that happens is that this socket bell mouths out. It gets spread, and then what it does is it locks this cover in place. So looking at the state of that thread, I wouldn't be at all surprised if I don't have a lot of trouble getting this cover off the back catch release. I'm just checking to see if that's loose. I'm feeling a slight amount of rock there, which may mean that the back catch release cover is loose on the tripod socket, or that the tripod socket is loose on the base of the camera. I won't know till I pull it apart. What else can I tell? The leatherette patch. The leatherette patch on the base here is a different pattern of leatherette than the camera. It's certainly not a Kodak leatherette, it's something else. So someone's cut a patch to replace the original, and that's the replacement. The accessory shoe looks in quite good order. Often they're quite heavily scarred up where a hot shoe flash has been forced into them, and it always leaves a line down the centre. That has got a line down the centre, but it's not very marked at all, so it's in quite good condition. Looking in from the front of the viewfinder, I can see in the finder window here, and I'm sure you won't be able to see it, but behind this front glass is a fingerprint on the front surface of the rangefinder lens. In the back of the camera, what have we got? There's no film in here, is there? No. That all looks neat and tidy. Nice and clean. I'm going to check the aperture setting. We'll do that. I'll set the shutter on B. And I'll set feeling what the diaphragm setting is like. It's smooth enough. It's a little bit stiff. The shutter certainly needs to be serviced. What happens is if the diaphragm, the aperture is too stiff because it's glued up with oil typically. When you go to shift the shutter speed here, instead of the aperture shifting with it, because they're clipped together at this point, it will jump. And so you'll think that you've just moved over to the next speed and expect the aperture to compensate, and in practice it hasn't happened. So that's why that certainly needs to be cleaned up. Right, well I think that the camera really needs to be taken apart. I'm going to start with the base of the camera, since the leatherette's loose. I'll see if I can get this leatherette patch on the rewind, on the advance lever off. I don't know what this leatherette will be like. It feels very thin. It's stuck quite well. The adhesive has quite a gooey feel to it. It might be that double-sided tape stuff. I'll lift that off and have a look. Oh, I can't really tell. It's quite sticky. The back catch cover release lever thing here, let's get that off. 2 screws. That screw was quite tight. That screw was quite loose. No, the cover came off, so my worries about the tripod socket were ill-founded. Take the catch off and its return spring. The film advance lever. 3 screws. They came off easily enough. The little rubber pad on the back of the lever here is very flattened out looking. It needs replacing. That's quite common. Let's try getting this leatherette off. The centre of this body here is down to the aluminium casting. Around the edges it's all on this chromed brass trim. It's quite common for the adhesive to stick differently to the chromed brass trim than it does to the aluminium body. The leatherette is loose in places and very well stuck in others, and it's quite a sticky adhesive. It's worth taking your time with the leatherette. There are no new matching leatherettes, of course, available. Right, let's have that off. I'll just check the state of that. You can see it was stuck with a big patch of adhesive here and here, and just a little bit at the end. That adhesive had been put on quite thick, I would think, at the time. But that leatherette is by no means flat. It's quite bowed up around the edges. It means it's got stiffened up over time. The chrome trim plate on the bottom here. Remove those screws. One last one in the corner here. That chrome trim comes off. It's in quite good order. It certainly needs to have all that old adhesive removed. So looking in at the base here, there's some obvious marks on the levers at this point. And that feels like adhesive. I would say that is some adhesive that is squeezed in under the leatherette. I might be wrong. Certainly that was lucky not to have jammed that up. The tripod socket. That screw was loose. That screw was very loose. And one over here even more so. So that explains the slight rock that I felt when I was testing the cover originally. The tripod socket was loose on the camera body. That'll do for the base of the camera. For the top of the camera, I'll remove the rewind knob. Our meter dial has to come off on this camera. We have two screws at the rewind knob end. They'll be chrome plated. One screw at the end of the top cover. Top cover should now lift off. Now it's always worth holding the meter down firmly with your finger while you lift the top off around it, so that you don't pull the meter up at the same time. This rubber pad just fell out from under the top cover. That holds down the meter at the end of the at this end. The meter can be lifted out of place. I'm looking at the state of this. There's a lot of crud here. That looks like corrosion. The meter seems lively enough, so it's probably okay, but it's certainly quite grubby. Back to the camera body. We can lift off the shutter release button, the film release button, and the spring for the film release button. Looking at the state of the viewfinder window now. Now there's certainly a fingerprint on the front of that. It's quite grimy looking. That will probably clean up quite well. We'll have to wait and see. I'll remove the strap lug from this end of the camera. All these parts are quite dirty, and they'll certainly benefit from going through the ultrasonic cleaner. I'm undoing the screws for the strap lug at the right hand end of the top cover. One screw and the stud here. That post for the film release button that holds down this bracket, which in turn holds the shutter cocking rack in position. I'll clean that and I'll know more about its condition once it's been cleaned. It's very hard to assess the condition of a cocking rack apart from being able to tell that it's absolutely failed until you've got it clean, and you can then look at the state of the teeth and judge whether they're fit for reuse or whether the teeth are too distorted and are likely to fail, and therefore the rack would need replacement. Take the gear off the top of the film advance. These parts are a little bit marked. I would say that that's mostly from dried grease and the like. We can lift that chrome trim off. That'll certainly need to be cleaned. At the top here, remove this screw with its return spring and the little ratchet pawl. This post supports the cocking rack and also holds down the guide bush here. The shutter release button, shaft rather, if I can lift that out, it's very grimy. There's a return spring, a coil spring down here in the body. It's not present on every camera, it's present in this case. You need to take great note of that, because if you displace it by removing the shutter release shaft, that spring has a habit of falling back in behind the bellows and causing you endless grief. I'm just removing the screws top and bottom that form the pivots, the hinges for the front door, and I can slide that off. Typically there's a washer at the top or the bottom or both between that door and the body. Well, there was one washer there. There was another one. Our film release lever. The release lever here, I'm just undoing the screw from that. I'll remove the screw and return spring. Now the release lever releases the film advance, allowing you to wind on to the next exposure after you've pressed the shutter. So that can come out. This is our lock lever. The lock lever locks the film when the frame counter reaches number 1. That's been removed. The return spring for the shutter release that I mentioned earlier is there. It's a bit sticky. Oh, it's got a bit of hair stuck on it. Alright, now I think that screwdriver is too short to do what I need done. Oh, this might do it. I want to remove the 2 screws that hold the rangefinder to the top of the camera body. That's one. This one here, I can see where my screwdriver is going. That's 2. There's our rangefinder assembly off there. The rewind shaft and the bush can come off the body. I'll take that apart, the inner, the main shaft and the bush. So what next? The rewind button, the sprocket shaft, the rewind button catch and its return spring, and then the advanced shaft there need to come off, so I need to get my pliers to remove this. I can see there's a loss of paint right here around the centre of this little boss. Now that's almost certainly where someone has attempted to screw a tripod screw into there. Of course this tripod screw doesn't fit in the middle of the camera, it fits at one end. Right back shortly. Rewind button. I'll unscrew that. The rewind button, its spring and washer. The single screw from the side that drives the sprocket on the shaft. That looks a little bit chewed up. Like somebody's been a bit rough with that. You should be able to lift out that shaft now. It doesn't want to come. That's better, it's out. And guide bush for the advanced shaft can come off, and the clutch assembly. I'll just pull that apart. That certainly could do with a clean. Our sprocket shaft can come out with the camera upside down. Release that spring for the back. The rewind button catch is released. I'll remove the screw. Remove its return spring. Remove the lever. Just checking the state of that lever. One of the cameras I did recently, this part was damaged. That one's fine. 3 screws here will hold the bush to the bottom of the camera. It's finding the screws through the hole in the cam plate. Those screws are loose. Would mean that the film advanced shaft was probably a little bit wobbly. I'll just remove its 3 screws. The grease on that shaft is quite sticky, a bit unpleasant, certainly needs to be replaced. Out with our film take-up spool. These are plastic, can be easily damaged by solvent. Keep solvent off them. You can get away with wiping the grease out of the inside with a cotton bud with a little bit of naphtha on it, but don't overdo it, and don't use anything more aggressive than naphtha. So there's the body stripped down. We need to be able to remove the shutter assembly from the body and then dismantle the focus mount, and then once that's all done we can remove the shroud from the front of the around here, all that sliding section. So I need the tool.